Good morning and welcome everybody to the launch of the America's Pledge report. It was a product of the two gentlemen who are behind me, Mayor Bloomberg and Governor Brown, who came together last year and began to work on a project called Fulfilling America's Pledge. As I think you all know, this is a project which began in the wake of the Trump administration's decision to pull out of the Paris Accord. Many things flowed from that terrible announcement, including an upswelling of states and private sector entities and cities and NGOs, universities, all reaffirming their commitment to helping to bring America within reach of our Paris goals. This report actually documents how that can be done. And so without further ado, I want to turn the podium over to the ambassador for the UN to cities, Michael Bloomberg.
Well, Mary, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction and all your great work keeping the U.S. moving forward in the fight against climate change. Let me also thank Governor Brown for being the driving force behind this summit and for bringing so many people from around the world together. I think it's impossible to overstate the effect that the governor has had and the hard work that he has done over the years. It is a great contribution not just to California and not just the United States, but to the world. He's done an incredible job, and I think he will be long remembered as one of the state's most visionary and successful governors, and his legacy on climate change will be a big part of that. So San Francisco really is the perfect place to host this event, and since the media attention on climate change tends to focus on the political fights in Washington, let me just step back and put this in perspective a little bit. Since 2000, the U.S. has reduced carbon emissions more than any other large nation. And in that process, it is a process that has continued since the 2016 election. Last year, U.S. emissions fell to the lowest levels in 25 years, and there are two main reasons for that. The first is that coal plants continue to close, despite the administration's efforts to prop them up. And over the last 6 years, more than half of all U.S. coal plants have closed or made plans to. And they are being closed at the same rate, maybe even a touch faster, under President Trump than they did under President Obama. People are demanding cleaner and cheaper energy. And the second reason is that cities, states, and businesses are taking action to reduce their emissions because it saves them money, it promotes health, and it supports growth. Indianapolis, for example, switched thousands of streetlights to LEDs, which is one of the things that help cut emissions by 17%. Orlando is aiming at 100% clean energy and is finding creative ways to get there, like installing solar panels on thousands of stormwater collection ponds. Georgetown, Texas, is running on nearly 100% clean power, and dozens more cities are on the way. So while the spotlight is on Washington, the real action is happening outside the Beltway in both red and blue states. This really is a bottom-up and locally led movement because the people and the companies that do business in America understand it is their interest, both short-term from an economic point of view and long-term so that we have a future. We certainly have a long ways to go, and that's why we're here. But there is every reason to be optimistic about what we can accomplish, and today we have some very good news. After the White House announced its intention to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement last year, leaders from across the country and from both parties came forward to say, we're still in. Bloomberg Philanthropies, I'm happy to say, teaming up with Governor Brown, are trying to bring all of them together under the banner of America's Pledge, and we're glad to have Mary serving as our vice chair. Today, we're here to announce that this bottoms-up movement is on a path that will put us within striking distance of the goal the U.S. set in Paris, even with zero support from our federal government over the next few years. That goal was a 26% reduction by 2025, and I'm happy to say we're already halfway there, and I believe we will make that goal. Keep in mind how big this movement is. America's Pledge is now tracking more than 3,000 cities, states, businesses, and universities who are committed to helping the U.S. reach its goal. The group includes cities and states that are home to more than half of the U.S. population. If the group were a country, it would have the world's third largest economy, behind only China and the overall United States. So we have enormous economic clout. We have the market forces at our back, and we have public opinion on our side. So I like our chances. Now, just about every other nation in the Paris Agreement, just like every other nation in the Paris Agreement, we are measuring the progress in that group and reporting it to the United Nations so that the world can hold us accountable. We've always said if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Numbers tell the story, and we are committed to letting the world know what we're doing here in America and trying to help others around the world do the same thing. If we can follow each other, the competitive pressures will get us to where we want to go. Last year, we submitted our first report to the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Bonn, Germany. And this morning, we're releasing our latest report. It shows that the U.S. is already about halfway to the Paris goal and outlines a set of 10 legally and politically feasible actions that the United States cities, states, and businesses can begin taking today to speed our progress. I'm also happy to report that our bottoms-up approach is spreading. For instance, over 200 Japanese cities, businesses, nonprofits, and universities launched an effort just like America's Pledge to aggregate their efforts called the Japanese Climate Initiative. Just last month, a new coalition was launched in Mexico. Now, that's not to say that the federal government's actions don't matter. By the EPA's own estimates, its new rules on power plants will result in at least 1,400 more premature deaths from air pollution every single year. That really is a disgrace. Just think about it. 1,400 babies are going to die prematurely because of some simple actions that were needlessly taken by the EPA. Americans shouldn't stand for it, and we should vote out of office anyone who refuses to acknowledge that climate change is a reality that is already here. Denying science just isn't a very smart thing to do. And that's one reason I've decided to get so involved in the midterm elections and to try to turn the House over to the Democratic Party. The Republicans in Washington have had years to show that they could lead on this issue, and they have failed. So over the next 6 weeks, I'll be supporting candidates who will take action on climate change and other issues, including gun violence. I'm sure you read in the papers this morning, there was another mass shooting that happened yesterday, this time in Southern California. I've always believed we owe it to the survivors to do everything we can to save lives and spare other people from having to deal with the pain they're feeling. And I know Governor Brown feels exactly the same way. As strong as he's been on climate change, he's also been committed to common sense gun laws. He's made California a national leader on both issues. There's still much more to do, but we're going in the right direction, and so is California. So I want to thank him for his leadership. Jerry, thank you, and for working with us to put this summit together. Let me now turn the floor over to Governor Jerry Brown.
Thank you, and I'm going to thank everyone for being here, being part of this summit. It's quite an undertaking, but the cause is certainly worthy of every effort that we can put together. I want to say that it's true. States, cities, businesses, universities, nonprofits, they're all showing the way with real commitment and real action on climate. We're getting it done, but we have a very tall mountain to climb. In California, I did recently sign the 100% renewable energy in the electricity market by 2045. At the same time, I signed an executive order that calls for a net zero carbon emissions throughout the whole economy by 2045. That's the most ambitious goal of anywhere in the world. And coming in the 5th largest economy in the world makes it very significant. Doesn't mean we're there yet, but the history has been governors first sign executive orders, then they become law, and then the action unfolds over the many years that follow. So that's where we are. It's a big challenge. Climate change is still not at the top of the political issue I don't think in any country, but we're putting it there. And we have to constantly raise our ambition, because the threat of climate change is as real as anything else we deal with, but it's more diffuse, it's more remote, and it only builds up over time, and in unexpected ways, when tipping points are passed, catastrophic outcomes could occur. And the great challenge is to be able to take action before one of these catastrophic occurrences. That's what takes imagination, takes political mobilization, and this America's Pledge is doing precisely that. We are in a state coming from Washington that is truly insane. Releasing more methane instead of taking it out as fast as we can really makes no sense. The short-lived climate pollutants that don't stay in the atmosphere that long, but are many, many more times more heat trapping, those are the gases, those are the emissions to pull out first, and that is the policy of California. So the Trump proposal to relax the controls on methane emissions is truly damaging, makes no sense, and just again underscores how important it is to have states and cities and businesses and universities all pull together to do as much as we can. This report shows we're getting a large part of the way to the goal. But even when we get to the goal, we have so much further to go. And that's why we need not only states turning around in their policy, but we need the people in Washington finally getting the message that climate change is real, and it's up to us to do something about it. Thank you.
Okay, the mayor and the governor have agreed to take some questions, so I'll moderate them. If I can see people, I will call on you. Starting over here.
Questions for Governor Brown. Right now, protesters are standing outside calling this a hypocrisy, saying California hasn't done enough to curb drilling in this state. Can we expect any announcements to that effect?
What was your last point?
Protesters outside are saying,
I heard the first part.
Can we expect any announcements talking about curbing drilling in California?
Look, as Mayor Bloomberg says, this is a 10-point, 10 dimensions where we're looking. There's no one-off here where you just do one thing. There's no one thing. There's many, many things. California, with the leadership of our Air Resources Board under Mary Nichols, has released a scoping plan that covers the whole range of emissions, from oil to transportation, to trucks, to housing, commercial, agriculture, cement, battery storage, you name it, it's there. So my plan is an integrated plan built up over time that is subject to review on a regular basis. And we welcome any suggestions people have. But I believe California has the most far-reaching plan to deal with emissions as well as oil consumption and production. Our goal is a 45% reduction in oil production as well as consumption. And we have the actual method of getting there. And that's what I think is very important. If there are other ways we can even make it better, I will. But make no doubt about it, there is no place in the world that has a more integrated, comprehensive, effective plan to reduce carbon emissions from all sources.
Mary, let me add.
Please do.
America's a wonderful country. Here we've got environmentalists protesting an environmental conference. It reminds me of people who want to build a wall along the Mexican border to keep people out from a country that we go to for vacations. Something's crazy here.
Thank you. All right, in the front row, yes.
Thank you very much. Marlo Hood with Agence France Presse. Question for Governor Brown. Regarding your executive order for calling for net zero carbon emissions throughout the entire economy, what weight does that carry in terms of actual policy implications? And is that something that you would have preferred to see in legislation?
Well, it's a very ambitious move. And looking back at how California got to where it is, the laws, the Global Warming Solutions Act, the laws on vehicle emission standards, they always start with executive moves that are then codified by legislative action, or actually votes by the people. So this is extremely ambitious. We need technological changes that don't exist yet. We need battery storage to improve dramatically. We need new kinds of fuels, new kinds of transportation, better building programs, different land use patterns, different lifestyle choices that people make. So this is a transformation that is called for that we will get to. And each of those little elements will become laws over time. But we got to start somewhere. And this is the boldest move that I have seen, certainly anywhere in the United States. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Governor Brown, you had taken a trip right after the U.S. pulled out of the Paris Agreement to China to both show commitment, but also you had signed an agreement as a state with a federal authority, the federal government, which was unprecedented. Are you also planning to increase the cooperation across the Pacific on clean air and carbon emissions? Because that is the region of South Asia and Southeast Asia where the highest carbon emissions in the world. And if that region doesn't turn soon, Paris goals will be very hard to reach because emissions cross oceans.
Yes, our own Air Board has worked with the Chinese on the development of their carbon trading systems and building regulations. So we will continue that partnership with China, with some of the subnational jurisdictions. And we're counting a lot on China. China is promoting the zero-emission vehicles in a very, very important way. It is the biggest market. And if the biggest market would keep ratcheting up the requirement for electric cars, hydrogen cars, the American auto industry will have to do that. So China and the 13 states that follow California and California are united in our efforts. So we'll continue the partnerships. We certainly need much greater ambition by India. There's a lot of things that can be done. So yeah, there's everywhere you look, there's a challenge. That's why I use the metaphor, we're at the base camp of Mount Everest, and we're looking up to say, there's where we got to go. It's about that difficult.
I might just mention that there's a side event going on with the sponsorship of the Natural Resources Defense Council and some other groups that brought together a number of Indian mayors and businesses and NGOs commenting on specific actions that they have taken and making commitments to do more, which is exactly, of course, what we hope this summit would engender. And that's, in fact, what seems to be happening is that representatives of a number of different regions have come to talk about what it is they can do. And I know Mayor Bloomberg has been traveling the world and meeting with many of them and has also been able to secure some specific actions in terms of cities buying zero-emission buses or decarbonizing their electricity systems. And this is where the reductions that will make up our efforts are really going to have to come from.
My name is Justice Bedu from Joy News, Ghana, West Africa. This week, the Secretary General spoke about how important it was for richer, more industrialized countries to support poorer, vulnerable countries that are paying the price for the pollution in the world, and rally them on how important it was for them to go on that path. My question is to Mr. Bloomberg on his role on the UN climate change agenda. What exactly beyond the talk and then the rally for them to do this is the UN going to do to ensure that there's action beyond the words in ensuring this is done?
Well, the UN can only do what its members let it do, and it does have the Security Council, which unfortunately blocks some kinds of things that the vast majority of countries would like to do. It is true that the bigger, more developed countries, more industrialized, create more pollution, although there are less industrialized countries just because of their scale that create an enormous amount of pollution, namely China and India. I think it's unrealistic to think that lots of big countries are going to go and support every small country in every one of their efforts. The good news is that if one country does one little thing to reduce greenhouse gases, everybody around the world benefits. It's also true that if one country doesn't, everybody around the world suffers. So we really are in this together. But if you just had the United States and China and India and a few of the Western European countries dramatically reducing the greenhouse gases, which they could do just by cutting out coal, all the other things help. But coal is such a big part of the problem if you can get them to do it. China is trying, although they still are building new coal-fired power plants in other parts of their country, but the pollution in the big cities, I think, scared them into doing something. India is much more problematic because of the way the country works, where there's no one central government that has the power the way of central government in America or China has. But they are working on us. And I think you also got to be careful in what you ask for. In India, they have a program to make all cars electric. That's a great idea. It will reduce the amount of pollution that cars generate. Unfortunately, if you generate the electricity that you're using to charge the batteries in those electric cars, if you generate it from coal, then net on balance, you're worse off. So there's no simple solutions to some of these problems. They're long-term. We have enormous industrial pressures and infrastructure that we're not going to wipe out overnight. Nevertheless, just think about this. If there's the remotest chance that the world could come to an end, it's pretty nonsensical to take all the prophylactic actions that you can just in case. You don't have to have a guarantee. And let me also say that for all these countries, you can easily show that it is in industry and individuals' best interest to be environmentally friendly. I can just tell you, when my company recruits people out of universities around this country, the kids all ask, what are you doing for the environment? It is a very big selling point. And companies will tell you their employees want to work for an environmentally friendly company. And their customers want to buy from an environmentally friendly company. But most importantly, the investors, the big pools of money, the pension funds and college endowments, those kinds of pools of money want their monies to be invested socially responsibly. And so when a big institution that manages money, let's say a BlackRock or a Fidelity, somebody like that, comes in to talk to your company about the next quarter earnings, right at the top of the list of the things they care about is, what are you doing for the environment? Because their investors are demanding it. So this is a win-win-win, but there's also pressure to make sure you go ahead for companies and for individuals who want to see their electricity bills go down and want to see their kids not have to go to the hospital with an asthma attack or not have the doctor say you've been drinking bad water and you've got stomach cancer.
We'll take 2 more questions.
Yeah, I want to just add a note to that. I think you were pointing to the problem of finance and where's the money to help in the transition in a lot of poorer countries. I would say there's a lot of money out there. Politically, it's hard to get hold of it. So there is private sector investment, there are pension fund investments, but it will take some government guarantees and it will take government money. Now, in the United States, the Congress just appropriated $715 billion for the defense budget. If you look at the weapons budget worldwide, it's over $1 trillion. So with a little bit of conversion, we could generate the funds to invest in those places that lack the capital to do what's needed. So what we need to do is to move the political will to a higher level, and we can generate the funds.
Governor Brown, how do you think historians will remember President Trump on climate and the environment?
For a colorful quote.
Well, it all depends, how long he's around and how much damage he can do. What seems to me one of the 3 latest acts of his on reducing regulation of coal and subsidizing it, sabotaging and trying to end the Obama clean power plan, and then trying to destroy the California vehicle standards, which also include electric vehicles, and then his move on methane, all together, that's a major assault on the well-being of the people of California and America and the world. It borders on not only insanity, but criminality. The way we're going to get climate warming under control is, first of all, to reduce the short-term pollutants that cause far more pollution than CO2. And that's methane. That's a big part of it. And there's black carbon or soot, and then there's these hydrofluorocarbons. We've got to get at those. So when Trump says, in effect, we like more methane going into the air, that is highly destructive, very highly destructive. So I think he'll be remembered on the path he's now, I don't know, liar, criminal, fool. Pick your choice.
All right, we'll take one more question. Front row.
Hi, I have another question for Governor Brown. What are the specific steps you would like to see energy agencies in California and lawmakers take in the near term to accelerate the transition away from natural gas generation and underground natural gas storage?
Well, I'd like to see a regional grid so that we can really make our renewable electricity efficient. We want to have renewable energy, but we want to make sure it's reliable, so when you turn the lights on, they go on, and that it's an affordable price. And the way you have to do that is to pick the most cost-effective strategies first as you work forward. And the regional grid is crucial. Investments in battery technology and storage, which California has already embarked upon. We already have 1,000 megawatts of storage, have to go further in that direction, and there may be other things like pump storage, so that when we get this intermittent power, particularly in days where the sun's shining, it's not very warm out, so people aren't using their air conditioning, we have a lot of wasted energy. If we can't sell that energy, then the cost of solar goes up. But if we have storage, if we can share it with the surrounding states, and if we can have millions of electric cars that tap into the grid at the right hours when it's otherwise not being used, and when you have a lot of surplus solar, we can get it all done. So just from this recitation, you can see that we have many elements to put together. And I've described a few of those that I think are important. Storage, grid, electric cars, and we can't do it all by ourselves. We need other states, and we need China to step up its ambition. So Detroit and the other automakers of the world come to the conclusion they not only have to make electric cars, they got to advertise them, they got to sell them, and they should not further make us dependent on the fossil fuel engine.
All right, we're going to do a photo on stage for everyone.
Great, thank you. Do we have copies of